Hello and welcome to the Suprteam podcast. Tanmay, I'm excited about this
Yeah, I'm
episode.
excited about this one because this is a metaverse special, Akshay. We actually haven't had a podcast discussing the metaverse, so this should be interesting. Why don't you introduce us to our guests?
Jin, welcome. Ahad, welcome. Jin and Ahad are both co-founders of a open source metaverse project called Webaverse. We'll kind of get into more details about what that is. We also have Loomdart, a well-wisher of the project and someone who's been super active in the NFT community, has launched a couple of NFT projects that includes Bywazis and the Loomlock NFT. We'll talk more about that in a bit. But welcome, everybody.
Glad to have here.
Howdy.
All right, Jin is an avatar, and we may be watching the future of pseudonymous identities expressing themselves over video.
Yeah, no problem. It's going to be more of a thing as profile pics become 3D avatars.
Okay, so we can get right into it. This was a piece of art that was posted on your Twitter at the Webaverse Twitter. We've linked to the Webaverse Twitter handle below. And it looks like we're in a version of the world where one is a centralized meta Facebook controlled version of the metaverse, and the other is a decentralized one, which is open source, open protocols that anybody can build on top of and enter and exit as they please. So can you kind of summarize this? Is that even the right articulation? Is it mutually exclusive? Do you think they're both, they can both happen simultaneously?
So I'll start off with that, and Jin can definitely add more flavor to it. It's kind of the similar concept as the three spectrums. You have the corporate West, you have the centralized East, and then you have the decentralized degens, right? I think the main idea here is that either you can be in an environment which is not made by yourself, and you can live in it, in which the data is not yours. It's controlled by the platforms, which exists even today. But now we're seeing with Web3, I think the biggest shift, which is the disintermediation of data and services, right? And I think that's a very powerful phenomenon when it will happen, because it is just going to take the power in the supply chain from the platform to the content creators. The graphics is basically trying to showcase is that, okay, Web3, okay, fine, it gives you more freedom, but at the same time, it gives you more responsibility. It also asks you to take your destiny in your own hands, right? So rather than expecting these platform companies to come up with great content, a lot of these contents will be driven by communities, which is already happening, which we see in the form of NFT communities. These are not just like profile pictures. They're basically sentiments attached behind these profile pictures. NFTs act as Schelling points in which these digital communities are aggregating, and a sort of a sub-micro internet culture is emerging with these communities.
Why is there this ideological commitment to building an open source version of the metaverse if Facebook allows users to bring their assets into their environment and out as they please? Is there a reason that y'all are committed to building this with every piece of tooling being open?
Yeah, I would say it really kind of boils down to freedom. Like, what choice do we have? Because the future, right now, the macro trend is everything is kind of becoming digitized, culture, society, and how much time we're spending in these worlds. And, I used to play a lot of MMO games, and all the stuff that I've grinded for was kind of locked into those databases, and all the things that people are creating in terms of content and just time sunk into these platforms is owned by these platforms. So I just kind of see these paths as being really like, do we want to have like a corporate serfdom where we're kind of owned by these centralized places, or do we want to kind of build our own lands and on neutral like infrastructure that we can have kind of sovereignty of in this digital landscape?
In fact, me and Akshay were discussing just before the pod. Like on the left, you see Zuckerberg with Meta. If you replace him with banks, right? which is okay. You got centralized financial entities, and then you have self custody, people being their own banks. In this case, the UI wasn't the source of dopamine. Okay, let me explain. Which is that I'm okay using a product that's little broken, does it's not pretty, because my main source of dopamine is money, right? Like, okay, if I can trade permissionlessly, that's great. But when it comes to the metaverse, where the main source of dopamine is the UI, do you think that a centralized entity that's been in the business for longer, like they're able to, just because they're able to coordinate a more top-down approach, they're able to have a stronger finish? Like end user cares more about UI in the metaverse. Like how have you thought about this?
So I think Jin is the best person to answer it. But even I can see it that there are many builders and hackers, especially the OG crypto ones, right? Like the people who started off with crypto voxels and all. They like the freedom. They don't want, and like at the end of the day, it's the same thought process. Do you want to live in someone else's story or do you want to build your own stories? I think when you start owning things, it is like freedom is priceless, right? Like it's not about the experience. Like even today, Minecraft and Roblox, which has much simpler gameplays, much simpler art styles, but since these are like creator driven, you will see a much richer ecosystem. And these and then the proof is in the numbers. These games have done extremely well. Jin, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm pretty bullish on like indies. Like every kind of a lot of the top VR games were developed by indies. I mean, just look at VR chat, for example. A lot of people really enjoy the freedom of expression that VR chat gives you, like custom avatars, custom worlds. These are things that may be like too risky for like the behemoths to adopt, and which they kind of limit your freedom of choice and expression. But people flock to those areas where they can really like choose how they want to represent themselves, whatever they want to build. And yeah, the indies are building the best content out there.
Is there, like, I was reading something about someone spoke about a Web 2.5, which spoke about studios that are traditionally already massive, but they kind of adopt a Web 3 model, which is they kind of open up a little bit and they get a best of both worlds kind of scenario. Have you guys read about this? Have you guys thought about this, saying what happens if existing studios do a little bit of rejig and they want to get a piece of the Web 3 action, so they open up a little bit? What happens then?
It's the traditional question, right? Like, I think disruption always happens in the industry because of two things: there's the product and there's the market. Just because the studio has these technologies, are they very much ingrained in these culture of builders and these organic lores and communities and stories which are coming up? That's not the case, right? And the proof is that we don't see traditional companies, just being, and that's why startups have always existed, right? Like, I mean, traditional companies always had power. Um, IBM was there when Apple came into existence. I think the more important thing into understanding is that they are two very different worlds. When they start thinking about, because gamer as a whole is a huge population, and these studios are trying to optimize for the gamer population, whereas I would say thinking about on a much longer term horizon, when you could actually feel that these immersive spaces would be used not just for pure gaming but for a very different use cases, right?
Yeah, Akshay, someone said that a lot of startups never actually take off because they think, okay, what if one of the bigger company does this? It's like the most pessimistic people about bigger companies are employees of bigger companies. People who are actually working in them. If you ask them, say, do you think you're gonna let yourself get disrupted? He's like, dude, I'm constantly worried that we'll get disrupted in these 4 ways because I'm too busy pushing papers.
I actually feel like everything that we're doing is something that Facebook is either doing right now or they're going to be doing very, very soon. Like to me, the path to a good version of the metaverse, or at least one with broad appeal, is pretty clear. You just need really great content. You need the hardware to support it. Facebook is going to be supporting that. And we'll get there. And I think Mark also realizes that. So I 100% think like we're on the same path. The problem with Meta, though, is the foundations that they're building all of this on is completely contrary to such a metaverse existing. It's all built on the back of Facebook and basically the ad industry and basically the industry of controlling the flow of information, rather than what I think the metaverse will actually be built on top of, which is like the industry of creation. And I would say a similar thing with big name studios who are like clearly trying to get in on this space. They're dropping NFTs. I think that's a similar case where they just don't get it. The foundations that all of that was built on is basically abusing the customer. It's charging you many, many times for the same game, really re-releasing in 5 years, charging again with a premium subscription, and then shutting down the servers after 2 years because it's no longer profitable. That's how gamers are used to being treated. And that's why they're generally like, they don't care about the NFTs. Like there's huge backlash every time there's a drop. So I think the foundations that we're building on and like the entire Web3 community is building on is what we actually need and what's actually going to succeed. And I think a lot of it just comes down to the energy and the reason that people are doing things. The reason that people are at companies like Meta is generally money. And I'm speaking from experience because we've lost good engineers to companies like Meta, and a lot of my friends are there. And really the only reason that I couldn't convince them to come work with us is the money. But that's actually a really easy thing to switch with Web3.
Okay, Loom, I want to come to you actually. You tweeted this earlier today. Do you want to maybe explain why you said what you said and what makes you so optimistic about Webverse and the fact that you're spending time with the team?
I think the main issue with kind of like crypto metaverse stuff right now is everyone's kind of like, there's this hot ball of money going around and everyone's trying to like attract this ball of money by like kind of showing off like concept art and stuff that like it looks really cool, but like some of it just isn't technically feasible and some of it isn't going to occur for like 6-7 years. And the thing is, like, Webverse has just been actively working on like building something that's like usable now. And I think that really does make like this huge difference where we like Meta's metaverse system is going to be here and it's not going to take like 5 or 6 years. And when it eventually comes, it's basically like there's a battle kind of going on right now for like attention. And I have this fear where like, since kind of current metaverse examples are very like, they're very just Robloxy in a sense, which is like perfectly fine. But the issue is everything garnering attention, like, hey guys, look how cool this thing we're making is, but it's going to be available in like 6 years. And the issue there is when the Facebook metaverse comes out in like 1 year or 2 years or so, people are going to kind of embed in that and be like, oh snap, this thing's actually pretty cool. I can like play in this while everything else is still getting built. And then these guys are going to kind of grow communities within the Facebook metaverse. They're going to kind of get items and stuff. And obviously by virtue of like the meta business model, they're going to be kind of entrenched in that. And so when it hits 6 years and all these crypto metaverses start coming out, it's like everyone's so kind of invested in the meta version of the metaverse that like there's just simply not that many people left. And like we have a very short window of opportunity here. And I think the fact that like Webverse has actively been building on this stuff and like has a system almost ready to go like is kind of key. Because like at the end of the day, this is kind of like an arms race.
Yeah, I think I think this is like a good segue to talk about what Webverse is, and you know it took us a while to understand it, and we were fascinated by the kind of possibilities of for creators and folks, especially in this part of the world where this is just a browser-based environment creation tool. And I thought this tweet storm or this tweet exchange combined with this graphic made by one of your community members explains this the best. The TLDR is it's a protocol and a standard and not an application. Do any of you want to take this?
I think Avier is the best person to take it. But basically, the TLDR is that standards move really, really slow. And that's one difference between Web 2 and Web 3. So, for example, you can see that like email to this date is unencrypted because you need to get like very different parties to agree on certain things, right? That's why browser standards also move very slowly. Whereas when things are done in like closed product platform companies, it's much faster. That's why Web 2 grew like it scaled so quickly. It was just like 1.5 decade. WhatsApp became encrypted within a year of its launch. So the thing which like Avier's realization was basically that, okay, the way to actually prove that you can do these things in a standardized way is by actually building a product and a fun experience to prove it, so that it is an inspiration for and a rallying cry for others that, okay, these things work on standard file formats, on your standard protocols, and let's start adopting them, so that when everyone starts adopting them, then the dream of the interoperable metaverse, as well as the metaverse of without walled gardens, is actually possible.
So if we just talk philosophy for a second, like how did Google become Google essentially? It was off of the open web. And more specifically, it's because they created a search engine for a new medium based upon these standards that everybody was building on top of HTML, where you declare some sort of semantics and then Google runs their own crawlers and their own algorithms and creates an indexing search engine basically that surfaces all of this information that was already out on the internet. So to a lot of people, the metaverse is kind of like the next evolution of the internet, right? But maybe with some gamified 3D crypto VR elements mixed in. So I figure if people are really serious about that, then we should be thinking about designing the metaverse, or however we envision the metaverse, on top of these same protocols. And these protocols already exist. They're in the web, and they've been proven. Essentially, everything's running the web. Even like your iPhone apps are essentially web apps a lot of the time. Like this technology has completely taken over the world, and now it's just getting better and better. And basically everything now that can run a browser also has a GPU, so you can run WebGL. And basically, it just feels like, it felt to me when I was just getting started with Webverse that just so many people are sleeping on all of this. And this is exactly what the crypto slash metaverse slash VR community needs. They need a set of standards to build on top of. So that's basically the genesis of Webverse. It's how do you create a 3D version of a web browser that you can actually play and that you would most critically want to play. And so we came up with the idea of like, hey, why don't we just throw together all these assets that everybody already has, and crypto's full of them. Everybody's dropping their own NFTs, often with 3D models. So why don't we just throw that into a game engine, animate it a little bit, take it seriously as a game. Let's see what kind of fun gameplay mechanics can come out of it. And yeah, we basically took it from there.
And you're also building a game to prove what can be built on, or
right,
to give people a glimpse of what can be built on it.
Right. So I think since this is something that's so new, or at least it still feels very new to a lot of people, especially people who are used to the whole monopoly of go get yourself a developer kit for Unity, go use Unity, deploy to this app store using their like closed source thing. To a lot of people, like they just don't understand that the web can even do all this stuff. So I think a lot of what we have to do is be the guinea pigs and take it seriously and build our own first party game on top of essentially the protocols that we're talking about.
Okay, I have a dumb question because look, I'm not a technical guy, so I'm trying to make sense of it. This is open to anyone. If I launch an NFT project, right, which is okay, there's a character that I have, and there's 10,000 variations of it, and a bunch of people come and buy it. Is there a way that I can make a game out of these characters using Webverse? Like, is that engine being built, or is it already built where these characters, these 2D flat images, can turn into 3D characters that can move around and play and that sort of stuff? Like, is that what's happening?
Yeah, so as Avier mentioned, it's the pipeline is a mix of the human protocol as well as the computer protocols as well, right? So with the 2D, actually Jin is very much involved as part of M3 org. He is actively working in enabling these NFT communities to move from their 2D collections to 3D collections, right? And then we also advise some of the communities on that. And once we have that, then you have your 3D set of NFT collections, and that's what Webverse is all about, that you can bring these 3D NFTs in and you can create a game experience
That's
out of
fucking
it.
insane.
You can even like put them as like AI NPCs. And I mean, Avier can talk much more about it, but yeah.
Like, this makes me not hate PFP projects. You look at PFP projects and be like, what's going on here? And now all of a sudden value is unlocked overnight, right? Like, that's pretty fucking cool.
That's I mean, the PFP project, I think, is the first step towards your digital identity. So your digital identity, first of all, is very different than your IRL
Correct.
identity, which we are used
Correct.
to. It has a 2D representation, it has a 3D representation, etc. Like, for example, for Jin, you can see right now he's in the form of a 2D avatar, but Jin has a similar avatar in CryptoVoxels 3D as well, which he uses. In other
Hey, sorry,
platforms as
Ahad, if
well.
you don't mind, if you don't, actually, I would love to dig into this with both Jin and Loom. Guys, you Loom, you're like a blueberry on the internet, and I like, and so
Jin is a
can you
ninja
talk a
serial
little
killer.
can you guys talk a little bit more about like how the pseudonymous identities have shaped your own lives? Is there a part of you that feels like you are a blueberry in real life?
I mean, it's kind of like the beauty of Twitter is that like you can really just mold into anything you want, and there's no kind of like nothing about your kind of real life identity really matters that much in terms of your image. And so it's just a lot of fun. Like I have like a bunch of kind of custom fan art for my blueberry, and I also sometimes LARP as a Wasi. It's just like, for one example, like if my like Twitter identity was my face, the amounts of custom artwork I would like get and receive would be either drastically less or like probably much more offensively aligned. Where like the fact I'm this blueberry, like I random people just DM me like images they've made kind of like featuring my blueberry, and it's just really amazing, and it's something that like just wouldn't exist if kind of I was like just the person behind Loomdart.
So we had Udi on the show, and all of the pictures that he receives are a bald version of himself. So, which, so, oh man, do you think that I guess the like everybody being on Twitter in this town square of sorts, right, where folks are talking to each other in their online identities, is an early version of what it's likely to just look like in the metaverse, but just more immersive? Do you think that just translates over, or is that a completely different experience? Given that you folks are building this,
I would say that avatars are like the next version of our social media profiles. Right now, like we have like a 2D PFP representation, but like from an avatar that is like your digital identity, your audio visual representation, and you can create all sorts of different I guess variations of it, kind of like what Loom was describing. I've got like an example here where like from my 3D avatar I could come up with all sorts of like, just boil it down to the metadata traits and what it could be visually represented as. And it's kind of interesting because all the variations of like Loom, you can always recognize them, like no matter what style he appears in, it's like characteristically a Loom Dart Blueberry. And I just find that all fascinating, and it's an area of still like really active frontier research and experimentation.
Yeah, I have like one. I have one last question on this because I'm fascinated by the cultural impact of this. Do you is that where this is going? Where just influential folks in the future are not the people are actually just digital avatars and not real people? Like a lot of the crypto avatars were on the cover of the Fortune magazine, and we have that over here.
Oh yeah, I think pseudonymity is like, it's always been kind of like the story of crypto. Like Satoshi Nakamoto, and then just going back as well to like the cypherpunks era and whatnot. It's just, it's going to also accelerate with avatars. Avatars are a privacy technology, and you get a lot more like of a authentic version, I think, when you have like privacy. Kind of like, it's always been embedded in game culture too. Nobody chooses their gamer tag as their real name. Nobody really picks a character that looks like them in an MMO.
Correct.
Usually, so it's a part of, I think, like digital culture that's super native to it.
Should we talk about some of the characters on this picture here. Loom, do you want to introduce us? Because I know you're featured in here.
Oh, yes, I'm on the dance floor with the Orca DJing is Tetranode, who is kind of a pretty, I guess, very, very big DeFi investor trader. And then next to me is my fellow partner at Eagle Capital, CL, the yellow cat. And then to my side is the, I guess his name's quite self-explanatory. It's a crypto dog. And then on the dance floor with us with the red hat, which is, I guess, kind of, you can't really put a McDonald's hat on like a fortune cover without prior permission. But the green Wossie is an inverse bra. It's kind of my dance comrades.
Agreed.
Right. And I guess like the relationship between the characters and the evolution of their character arcs are all in real time, done independently in a decentralized way, but it all comes together on Twitter and on podcasts like this occasionally.
Actually,
Twitter was the original metaverse.
yeah. No, actually, I think that's a very important point. And it kind of relates back to why I think that the metaverse has its roots in crypto, is because the lores are very strong in crypto. You know, it starts from Satoshi. Satoshi itself is a lore. I mean, Bitcoin itself is a lore, right? Like, we believe in it. So I think that the concept of like these lores, of like these organic lores being developed in crypto, has stood the stand of times. It started from Satoshi. It's present even today. We have Blueberry. We have a dog. We have a cat. And people take it seriously. I mean, a cat is a cat. Like so a rat is a rat. That's how it works. And I think that's a very important reason why I think metaverse is going to be very native to crypto, other than just the infrastructure for payment rails.
All right, Loom, you're up again. But this is a recent NFT project that really has sprung into somewhat of prominence on Twitter over the last few days. But okay, can you maybe explain what the project is, why it's culturally significant, and why you said what you said?
So gosh, how to say this? So Milady is kind of a very I think fringe is the very correct term for the Milady community, but they're, how to explain Miladies?
I love this so much.
It's just a very, it's like kind of New Yorky underground hip hop, like underground bar scene type thing. And so one of their kind of raves was, I think it went a bit south or such. And then there was like this rumor that they were kind of getting investigated by the FBI. And like this kind of real big cult nature just really grew. And people kind of like vibed with the idea that like, hey, look, I too can be kind of like this. I mean, deranged is putting it lightly, but like just the way some of the main Milady accounts tweet is just very, it's like cool and funny to look at, but like if you were walking past one with your kids, you'd like kind of push them to the side and make sure that like you were in between them. Is how like it's like you laugh, but you feel like you probably shouldn't laugh. Is kind of the Milady vibe. The Milady aesthetic is also just super unique. Like no other thing looks like this, and that kind of gives some power to it as well, where like it's very identifiable. And so yeah, I'm just convinced that Vice is like gonna put out an article on Miladies. It probably won't color them in a good light because the mainstream loves to like, but like I just feel like it's inevitable.
Jin, we pulled up some tweets that we thought were interesting.
Fairly self-explanatory, but I was hoping that you could double click on it a little bit, which is I think 6 components, 6 virtues that make the metaverse open. Jin was wondering if you'd wanna just take us slightly deeper through freedom of expression, freedom to transact, right of exit, etc., etc.
I wrote this as well because metaverse has been used a lot in just people talking about it and branding and marketing. And now I see people talking about the open metaverse now that metaverse has become saturated. And I really want to kind of create a clear line and make sure that we kind of have some standards when it comes to talking about what makes it open. So like when it comes to like freedom of expression, I think the best platform to kind of draw an analogy to is VR chat. People love the freedom to build their own worlds and create whatever custom avatar they want to represent themselves as. And yeah, spend 5 minutes. And I think crypto should spend more time like exploring some of these worlds, just to kind of get an understanding where the user's base is at and what they really like about freedom. Because we like freedom of, we understand freedom of to transact, neutral infrastructure for payments. And Punk 6529 has a really great thread on this and how it's so core to so many other freedoms. It is like a bridge, and to all these other things. So we need freedom to transact. Otherwise, like there's a lot of other stuff kind of falls apart there. And to leverage interoperable open standards and or open source, like you can't just put NFTs in a virtual world and call it the open metaverse. It has to go deeper than that. Like what made the web so great, especially in the early days, was view source. Like being able to see a web page, understand it, mod it, remix it, and it also just creates the opportunities for extensibility across different platforms, and it doesn't lock you into one platform, which gets to the next point, right of exit. And if you have played some games in the past and spent a lot of hours in it, and somehow server shut down and you get nothing, that's kind of, or you're unhappy with the devs, like you should have the right of exit where you can export your stuff and bring it to somewhere else. And that's so core to crypto, like it's this decentralized backend, like where if you don't like the front end, like if you don't like OpenSea, try LooksRare, for example. So it's decentralized front ends for the same data layer and strong guarantees of privacy. I believe the metaverse is like in different layers. Like you should be able to run it offline if you want to, over the LAN if you want to. It shouldn't require an internet connection and access through like this one URL that you access your content. So the ability to kind of really view what's happening under the hood, I think is very important to what makes it open. I kind of compare Linux and Windows.
As I was reading this, one of the things that Tanmay, we've seen so many startups pitch, right, is this idea of a decentralized Twitter, and that this is Twitter, but it's just decentralized and it's just basically trying to build the same product. And maybe that thought is misplaced because Twitter is good as it is, and a decentralized version of Twitter is actually a metaverse-like product. Because if you took these criteria and applied it to a decentralized version of Twitter, like let's say DSO or whatever, like that's essentially what they're trying to accomplish, right? You're trying to accomplish all these 6 things, but you have a hangover of using a Web2 product like Twitter that's already good as it is. And so maybe like if you worked out from first principles what a product with all these criteria should look like, it's probably something that looks entirely different from Twitter. Does that factor into when you're building Webaverse at all?
I think it factors a lot into the product itself. So on top of the game engine, we're building ways for essentially characters to be emotive, like ways to basically play out scenes, and we're also integrating AI into all of this. So basically by uploading your character or just logging in and loading up your PFP NFT, you give it a voice. And I think like a lot of what crypto Twitter has become is kind of like the evolution of social media, except it's built on this weird protocol of Twitter, which like really wasn't made for it. But like people are starting to communicate more and more in terms of memes, and just having a profile pic itself is like super important in terms of just showing belonging to a certain community. I think the next evolution of social media is going to be definitely very metaversey, in the sense that like people clearly don't even have the tools right now to be able to say what they want to say and like make the things that they want to make. And part of like what we're building with Webaverse is just giving people the tools in order to be able to do that.
That's super interesting. I mean, moving crypto Twitter into its next iteration is what we have seen some early versions of the product, and on Webverse. So let's maybe take a look at that. Before we get to that, we need some context here for our folks. I think they'll know who these characters are, but can we explain the phenomena of Vazis, why they're so integral to the crypto culture? On the left is I guess, one of the earlier ones, and on the right is Loom, one of the Vazis from the ByVazis project. So maybe we can start with you.
Awesome, yeah. So kind of back in 2017, I think, when crypto Twitter was still relatively big, but like not the kind of thing it is now. There was a user by the handle of Wasserpest who kind of found the original image of a Wassie, and it was like he was like, "Oh, this thing looks pretty cool," and he kind of used it as his profile picture. And then just like kind of for a few years or so, other people started to like occasionally adopt it, kind of make their own variety of it. And it just really grew as like this big kind of culture thing. And I really think that like it's just such a kind of awesome, very crypto Twitter native like framework basically, where you can really like express yourself through this thing. Like you can, like I really do believe that Wassies are just like an amazing metaverse companion, because like you can truly express yourself through, and it's like a very kind of, it's not trying to be anything amazing or massive, it's just like there, it just wants to have fun. I really do think that Wassies are going to be like this huge global phenomenon, which is why I was kind of doing a drop for a passion project for like a few years now that I really wanted to kind of develop on. But that project was going to take like a good year-ish to kind of fully just get the stuff out the Loom lock. So we thought that like while we were waiting for that stuff to get developed, we'd kind of give people artwork to kind of keep the community engaged, because obviously like when you sell something that's kind of coming in a year's time, it's like in crypto, interest is very, very sporadic, and it's like boom, boom, boom. So we needed something to kind of keep people engaged and happy. And so we like started off doing like a few Wassie things, but it just really, really took off. And so we ended up like actually creating a second company just to do Wassie stuff, so we could kind of separate the two. Because it ended up where like they would kind of conflict with each other. But basically like Wassies are just a very, very nice kind of blank image you can express yourself onto. Like we have Yoda Wassies now. We have I think even like a bunny rabbit Wassie.
It's so composable, right? I think what I really love about the Wasis are two things. First of all, they're so composable. Second of all, they don't have a flex. Like in the culture where like everyone is trying to flex, like the Wasis are the opposite of a flex.
Everyone's kind of so caught up on trying to be like the hero or the big thing, while these things are they're just happy to like be here, and they don't live long, only 14 days, bless them. So
this is we get to kind of like the pre-final segment here. This idea of an internet cinematic universe, and Jin, you had a tweet storm about this, and it's visually represented in this, right? With the idea of characters from many worlds coming together and coexisting. Do you want to maybe talk through a little bit of what you meant by in that tweet storm by the internet cinematic universe?
Sure. I think, we see big studios in which they have their IP, they have their characters, like Disney and owns Marvel, for example, and they create transmedia around this collection, games, movies, comics, etc. But the universe that we live, work, and play in is here on the internet. And in that tweet storm, I also have like some XKCD comics of like, if you were to map the internet, what it looks like in these communities, like Facebook would be like the size of China, for example, and you would have like the archipelago of like the blogosphere, etc. And crypto Twitter as well as its own kind of like thing next to the web of Twitter, etc. But this is where we live, work, and play, and we are the characters in it. And there's kind of a meta aspect to that, the breaking the fourth wall. But, so kind of like juxtaposing next to Ready Player One, where it's a lot of IP owned by these big studios, we have IP that's being created and owned by communities, which you see here in this picture. So it's like this open source Disney 3.0 concept coming to life, in which this internet cinematic universe is a cinematic kind of transmedia, like it is the one in which we are all like co-creating together.
This is actually really profound, because what Webverse lends itself to is two communities, one of developers and the other of creators, right? Where the creators are artists who are who are building these characters and putting them into an environment where they come alive, and the developers are helping build products on top of Webaverse that maybe helps them build those worlds better. Is that like the dual side marketplace of open source communities you see?
So creators as well as communities. I think the important thing is not just about building the product, it's the stories as well, which is what this picture is lending itself to, right? Like all of these characters which you see, thousands of people, if not more, have very strong associations with them. I mean, you see the Wassies there, you see Small Thing there. These are characters which people interact with on a daily basis. They're probably more relevant to many people than your Superman and Batman. And like a lot of these stories have been built collectively by the people rather than just some giant corporate. I think the future of like the new media which is going to exist, the lines are going to blur very much between what we classify as production and a game. Productions being done in VR worlds, virtual productions are already happening. So I think like when these like when whatever we classify as metaverse, a very strong component of it not just is like the interaction, but it's also the stories which are coming out of it, right? Which is what's happening.
I'm super excited about it. Like when a lot of these collections are getting 3D avatars made, and that gives a lot of the community like the ability to play a role as like an actor in this kind of decentralized like Hollywood studio.
Yeah.
Like it's all slipping into the cloud and being distributed and democratized by consumer VR equipment, for example, providing like full body tracking that's affordable, AI as well. And so we have a lot of the tools to create our own like stories within virtual worlds as the sets, and these avatars as like character designs, and animate it and create games out of it. It's all kind of merging.
Yeah, and I hope it happens quickly because I'm fucking tired of the Avengers, dude. I can't watch. I cannot. It's been going on for like a decade now. Thing doesn't end.
Exactly. So see, and I think that's the core thing which I have started realizing, that when in whatever world you see, when in science fiction they depict metaverse, you see like like droids kind of things and robots and all of that. Do you want that, or do you want this colorful image? Like I think there's a reason kids like cartoons and all. I think it's much more pleasing, and it's a much it's more humorous and an escape, right? Like the idea, first of all, the idea of the metaverse is not that we'll be spending more time digitally. We already spend 12 hours a day digitally. I think that's not the idea, that the time will increase even further. The idea is that it's just going to be a more immersive and a more engaging experience.
Speaking of AI, this is a kind of intuitive thing that's hard to express, but I think the world is sleeping on how good AI has become and how powerful it can be in terms of creation, especially if you build something from the foundations of the web or some sort of declarative platform where all of these assets can be understood by AIs, remixed, and then brought to life. The tooling has gotten crazy good. I can't even show you a lot of this stuff because it hasn't passed like approvals from OpenAI. But like there are ways that you can drop in your NFT, have it come to life, have conversations with the other NFTs that are around you. Looking at your Twitter, for example, and basically giving your character a real life presence in the metaverse. In VR, you can meet your NFTs just through the power of AI. And I think this is something that a lot of studios are just completely sleeping on. And there's another aspect to kind of this poster and what we're trying to do with Webaverse, where I think a lot of people are realizing that like how much of their lives are driven by these AIs, except they're not good AIs. They're AIs basically designed to exploit the worst in us, to give more profit to some lizard at the top. What we're trying to do with Webaverse is completely flip that on its head. It's basically using AIs, giving AI to everybody, and empowering them to not need Meta.
So Avi, if you had to address a lot of artists are probably watching this as our developers, do you have any specific call to action for them to get involved with Webaverse? Maybe you're hiring, maybe you want them to build on a product that you're about to launch. Anything at all?
We are definitely hiring for essentially everything, especially strong developers. As you can imagine, this is a very transmedium project with a lot of tendrils. So strong developers of all sorts, especially game dev types. But if you're the kind of person who has your own community, whether that's a crypto community or just any community at all that's related to art, we want to find a way to kind of plug you into the metaverse. If you haven't been red-pilled, we'd love to talk to you and we'd love the opportunity to convince you that the metaverse can actually be a good thing, and it doesn't have to be this nonsense that Zuckerberg is selling, essentially.
We'll link to the open roles that Webaverse has. I know y'all are looking for someone also to help you integrate with Solana. So if there are Rust developers listening to this, you might want to click on the link and check out some of the opportunities available.
Just before we end it, we are definitely going to be launching soon. We do all of our development in the open, so we try to broadcast everything on Twitter. So everyone can just follow our Twitter. So the app has a live demo, like anybody can check it out. It's like we do development 100% in the open.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us. We'll probably get together
Thank you so
very
much.
soon once again to double click on more things. See you guys next time.
See you.